If there's a heavy metal band bigger than Metallica, then I haven't heard of them. Metallica are undoubtedly the kings of heavy metal,
and are the most successful heavy metal act of all time,
selling over 125 million records worldwide, playing to millions of people worldwide during their tours each year, and they have also become the first metal band to garner over 1 billion streams in 2021. They are a household name and a band that many of my peers first started listening to before venturing into the dark world of other metal subgenres. In fact, I bet that they were the starting point for many metalheads. But before the fame and success, there had to be a beginning, and as such, I bring the focus for today's episode of Retro Reviews on Metallica's debut album, Kill 'Em All, released on this day 40 years ago, and we will try to find an answer to the following questions. How important was Mustaine to Metallica? Was kicking Dave out of the band a good move? How does this compare to their early demos? And is the album still any good?
I guess to answer the first two questions, we must discuss the band's history.
So let's not fart us about as we try to make this next part somewhat brief, even though it is intertwined with the making of the album. When it comes to the history of Metallica, there really is only two people: James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich, the founders of Metallica. Not to understate Kirk Hammett and his involvement in the band, after all he is Metallica's longtime guitarist, but Metallica really is the baby of Lars and James. However, for reasons we will get into later in this section, he is technically not part of the original lineup. So to discuss the history of Metallica, we must first talk about James and Lars and how they met. To understand Metallica and who they are now, we must discuss the band Leather Cover. Who are Leather Cover, you ask? Well, they are a long-lost defunct band from the LA area that performed covers of various bands from the new wave of British heavy metal genre. The bands that they would cover included Diamond Head, Iron Maiden and Sweet Savage, amongst many others. They would even write original tunes from time to time, such as a song called Hit the Lights. Sounding familiar now? Leather Charmer was one of James Hetfield's first bands, and included other members such as guitarist Hugh Tanner, drummer Jim Milligan, and bassist Ron McGovney. Tanner would eventually be replaced by Troy James, but the band would eventually dissolve after Jim left them. Now, our Danish native Lars Ulrich is an interesting case. Lars' father is Torben Ulrich, who was a professional tennis player, even reaching the semi-finals in Wimbledon during the double seed in 1959. Lars would follow in his father's footsteps and train to become a tennis player as well, even moving over to America to train professionally. For 6 grueling months, Lars did nothing but play tennis every day, and it is because of this that Lars eventually dropped the tennis racket. Besides tennis, Lars had another passion in life, which was music, in particular, drumming. Torben once cited that his son received massive joy when he got to see Deep Purple live when he was only 9 years old at the time, and it was incredible for him to see. Lars even stated that he ran out and bought his very first Deep Purple album, Fireball, the very next day after the concert. After leaving his tennis career behind, Lars moved over to the West Coast to try his luck in becoming a musician, eventually coming across a news advertisement looking for a drummer, which was placed by James Hetfield. When the pair first met, Lars had stated in an interview that James was a very shy person, but they immediately bonded. James has also mentioned that Lars is on a different planet to him, and they both bonded over their love for music. Well, James's influences were mostly from the American music scene, such as with Aerosmith, and Lars brought to the table various European influences such as King Diamond and Herring. They both filled each other's gaps in musical taste, showing off their vinyl collections and bounced ideas off each other. In fact, it was from a mutual love for the bands Motorhead and Diamond Head that Metallica was born. People often say it is the conjunction of these two heads. A fun fact, but Lars Ulrich made it inside one of the albums from Motorhead's early releases back in the 80s, before he started with Metallica. The story goes, he wandered into the recording sessions of Motorhead and decided to have day drinks with God, aka Lemmy, which is a dangerous idea under any circumstances, and the insinuating result was Lars vomiting on himself and passing out. This photo can be found in the artwork for possibly the Ace of Spades album, No Sleep Till Hammersmith, or Iron Fist, or maybe even a single. I know it was sometime between 1980 and 1982, that much is for sure. With Lars and James, you had the startings of Metallica. They also incorporated their former band member Ron McGovney to perform in bass duties. Lars wasn't the only one to answer the same news advertisement that James James placed. In fact, the other musician to apply for the role of lead guitar duties was none other than future Megadeth frontman Dave Mustaine. There are two stories behind how Dave was chosen for his role. First was that James and Lars loved his expensive setup and hired him because they knew he would sound awesome. Second, according to Dave Mustaine himself, he was doing warm-ups in the other room waiting for the band, and when they stepped out, he asked, "Well, am I going to audition or what?" To which they said, "Nah, you've already got the job." I think both stories are true, knowing these musicians. So, what about the band's name? How did it originate? Lars stated in an interview he was hanging out with some people at a kegger, one of whom was Ron Quintana, and he was discussing how he wanted to start a magazine dedicated to music, and was deciding whether to choose between the name Metallica or Metal Mania for the name of the magazine. Lars urged him to choose Metal Mania, and kept Metallica as a name for his future band. Ron would go on to become a music publicist and run his magazine Metal Mania between 1981 until 87, where it changed over to Videozine or Video Mania from 88 until 92, and it eventually became Media Mania. In 1982, the band would then set out about recording and writing new material. The first was the 1982 Whiskey A Go Go audition tape, a tape of live recordings with 2 covers that was used to get Metallica a spot as an opener at the Whiskey A Go Go when Saxon was performing there. The next was the Ron McGovney 82 Garage demo tape, which has 7 tracks, 4 of which have Diamond Head covers on them. And given Diamond Head's seriously underrated debut album Lightning to the Nations, which is worthy of a whole new episode of Retro Reviews in itself, I'm not surprised. Power Metal was next, featuring 4 songs, 2 of which were new additions, and perhaps their most famous demo, No Life Till Leather, shortly after, featuring all songs that can be found on the Kill 'Em All album, bar Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, and 4 Horsemen, but I'll cover this in depth while talking about the songs. Metallica were doing pretty good at this stage, becoming a staple live act in Los Angeles at the time, performing in multiple places. However, their direction would change one day when they witnessed one of their opener acts, Trauma, perform, and were blown away by what they were seeing and hearing. What they saw on stage was one of the dazzling performances of Cliff Burton, Trauma's bass player, and a mop of red and brown hair furiously swinging back and forth as he banged his head constantly while furiously plucking his 4-stringed instrument. It was at that moment that James and co knew they needed him in their band, and after getting his number after the show, they set about headhunting him. Cliff Burton's inclusion into the band was a game-changing moment for the band, as Cliff is known in the bass and heavy metal community as a god, who is perhaps one of the best metal bass players in existence. All Metallica fans know this, and it isn't news to any of them. But if you haven't heard of Cliff, then I heavily implore you to watch his videos after finishing this one. They will blow you away. Cliff had the knowledge in music. He knew its theory. He actually knew how to read it, and he definitely knew how to write a song. When he was young, he would practice for 6 hours a day, and was in a high school band known as Easy Street, which contained future Faith No More members, guitarist Jim Martin, and drummer Mike Puffy Borden, and would later be known as Agents of Misfortune. Cliff would replace Ron as the bassist for Metallica, but under the condition that they moved to San Francisco. Now, anyone who knows Dave Mustaine knows that he is not one to hold back, and during his tenure with Metallica, he did just that. But his actions were amplified by his drinking and drug use. Not saying that the others were clear of any wrongdoing, but this is definitely on both parts of them. I mean, Metallica would later be known as Alcoholica by the fans, and James has gone on to rehab twice. But when you're young and drunk and stuck with Dave Mustaine, you are going to have a bad time. Many times the band members would come to blows, and they did this on several occasions. Eventually, the rest of the band had enough, and decided decided to fire Dave, leaving him on the side of the road with a couple of bucks to live off. And this was right before they recorded their debut album. With nothing but seething anger fueling Dave at the other band members' actions, he would form Megadeth, eventually becoming one of the big four thrash metal bands alongside Metallica, Slayer, and Anthrax. Even to this day, I think that fire is still warm inside of him. With Dave out of the picture, Metallica needed a new guitarist, and they would find their new talent with another band's guitarist. You see, Metallica also released a live album on the 29th of November in 1982 called Metal Up Your Ass, and at this show, Exodus performed as the opener for them, which was Kirk Hammett's band at the time. James and Lars didn't recall the first time that they met Kirk, as they were all part of the scene at the time, but they hired him to replace Dave on guitar duties. That's all I could find out. It's a bit anticlimactic, right? James, Lars, Dave and Cliff get a whole section, and Kirk's introduction is somewhat of a cliff note on the band's history. But that's the music scene for you. So that's the history of the band. Now let's discuss the album. So let's not sit around and fuck spiders, let's dive straight into the track list from this record, and with the first song. Hit the Lights is the first track, and a great opener that builds up in volume before the metal assault we are about to witness. The title might also be possibly a nod to the influences of Diamond Head and their song Shoot Out the Lights, even though the lyrics do not correspond with each other. Shoot Out the Lights talks about a drunk friend shooting at lights, while Hit the Lights is about the thrill of playing shows. Oh, and by the way, this is a common theme on their first album, so it won't be the last time you hear that line. It's also the first song the band wrote, or rather the first one James wrote, as mentioned before, when he created this tune while in his previous band, Leather Charm. Most people would be aware of Metallica's inclusion in the Stranger Things series, when Eddie plays Master of Puppets in the Season 4 finale. Damn it, that ending still gets me. But Metallica actually had a brief appearance back in Season 2 with this song. In fact, this song was also used in the X-Men Apocalypse movie when Angel gains his superpowers. This track has a curious history, as its riff was written by Dave Mustaine when it was originally known as Mechanics, and would later be reworked for Megadeth's debut album under the same title. In fact, if you listen to Megadeth's version of this off their album Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good, it's nearly identical except for the lyrics that are different, and it's just an extremely faster version of this song. When I first found out about this and played Megadeth's song, it blew my mind. I knew Dave was in the band, but I didn't know to what extent his legacy had left. And of course, I originally thought that he stole the riff. Boy, was I wrong on that part. There was also another song that Metallica borrows a riff from, which is Lynyrd Skynyrd and their song Sweet Home Alabama. Apparently when Dave wrote this, he played a section of the song during the midsection as a joke, and it was left on in the end. This adds to the list of borrowed riffs Metallica have used over their careers, and comes up again during another song on this record. Motor Breath is the only song in Metallica's history that was solely written by James Hetfield over their 11 studio albums. Let that sink in for a moment. It's also a balls of the wall song that seems to allude to one of three things: his carpe diem attitude, his love for Motorhead, or his love for all things that are cars and things that go fast. I mean, the third part isn't that hard to believe given the song Fuel and his penchant for fast cars, as can be seen in Some Kind of Monster, the documentary. I think it's a combination of all three of these things and is a good enough reason to get up, go outside and do something fun. Of course I say this while writing this script on a nice sunny day, so I'm glad that you are here to watch this and hope that you are enjoying the retro review so far. This song was the second single released from the album on the 20th of January 1984, and the cover of the single was taken from an excerpt of the novel The Devils of D-Day by Graham Masterton and its graphic depiction. I have seen it about for a long time in the Metallica camp, but I never knew its origin, so I'm glad that I'm writing this review and found out about its history. This song was written by Dave Mustaine initially and reworked by James and Lars, with Lars stating they rewrote the song to sound more like Run to the Hills. Which was very popular at the time in 1982 when they included it on the Ron McGovney 82 Garage demo tape, but I don't see the parallels between the two songs except maybe in pace. And as for the Lars haters, keep in mind that the outro uses 16th notes on the hi-hats at a tempo of 179 beats per minute, which is very impressive.
Bass solo, take one.
Probably the most famous lyrics for an instrumental song. Also, the version used on the album was not the first take. There were actually 6 to 8 takes for this song. Anesthesia Pulling Teeth is Cliff's baby and his major contribution to the album. A near 4-minute bass solo of epic proportions that even Mitch Lofan would have to concede is indeed worth listening to. To the uninitiated, this song was to the bass world what Van Halen's Eruption was to the guitar world. In fact, it's better than Eruption. When James and Lars first heard Cliff, they actually thought he was a guitarist, given that his solos were just quite epic. And this shows his mastery of the 4-string instrument. There had been impressive bass players before in the past, and many songs with iconic bass line intros, but outside of the jazz world, a nearly bass-only song was unheard of, let alone one that would rival many skilled guitarists. This song would serve as the zenith of what it is to achieve as a metal bass player, even to this day. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, headbanging is defined as the violent rhythmic shaking of the head by heavy metal fans. Whiplash is defined as an injury caused by a severe jerk to the head, typically in a car accident. The song Whiplash is about headbanging so hard you get whiplash as a result. Brutal. Many metal fans have suffered from this, and even musicians, such as Slipknot's percussionist Chris Fern, and it makes you wonder how Corpse Grinder didn't suffer the same result. Hey, he didn't come to be known as George No-Neck Corpse Grinder without decades of building those neck muscles. Seriously, that guy could power a city with his windmill capabilities. Actually, that gives me an idea to use headbangers as a power source. Yeah, maybe not. This song would be included on the soundtrack for the Adam Sandler film That's My Boy, as well as being included on the Tony Hawk's Underground 2 soundtrack, and of course the Metallica version of Guitar Hero. It's a kick-ass tune, and one of their best from this record. Also, the movie with the same title was pretty awesome. This song feels like a deep cut in hindsight, only because it doesn't really receive the rotation in live performances it once did, and is one of their best songs from the album. It's a brutal and fast-paced piece that holds no quarter and takes its namesake from one of James Hetfield's very first bands. This is another song that has Mustaine listed as a writer, and Dave even ended up using part of the riff from this track on his song This Was My Life from the Countdown to Extinction album. No Remorse. What a track, and one of the early examples of what I believe is the Metallica style of writing that would become a staple of their future records. The intro sets the scene, the bridge playing the song, repeat until about halfway when the change happens, that leads up to the solo until the outro that slows down the tempo. The song is about a soldier expected to kill with no remorse, and two of the riffs heard in this song are actually a combination of two early songs the band wrote, known as Handsome Ransom and Let's Go Rock and Roll. This song has also been cited as serving the inspiration for the game Doom, in particular its main character Doom Guy, and that's in regards to the lyrical matter, and having never played the game, I guess I couldn't say with any certainty, but I did see the movie featuring The Rock and Carl Urban, so I guess that counts.
I'm not supposed to die.
Damn, what is it with the curse of Carl Urban always playing lead roles in movies based on video games or comic books that are just doomed to fail? Get it? Seriously though, Dread was such an underrated film that you must watch. Love you, Carl. Are you searching? Are you going to seek and destroy? It's one of the most iconic songs from the Kill 'Em All album, and this is definitely due to the fact that this song serves as the closing track for almost every performance they have done. And can you blame them? It's a perfect closing song under those circumstances. The original version for this song was shorter and only had about 2 chords, but after extensively listening to Merciful Fate for 6 months, they added various elements to the song to make it a near 7-minute epic. The song also adds to the list of Metallica's borrowed licks, incorporating the solo from Saxon's Princess of the Night into the solo of Seek and Destroy, and much more added sections. Live performances of this song usually last much longer as the band draws out their clothes and works with the crowd to get them singing along, and that can be seen on many of their live records, such as on Live Shit, Binge and Purge, where this song goes for nearly 20 minutes in duration. I feel this song is easily the most shunned track on the album. It doesn't help it when it's the last song off this record, and coming off the back of one of Metallica's most well-known songs. I mean, it's still a pretty badass track that is about rallying the metal community to take over the world, and this song has enough power behind it to give you that confidence to do so. To my surprise at least, looking over the song's play counts on Spotify, it still has more plays than Phantom Lord and Anesthesia Pulling Teeth. Metal Militia would also serve as the namesake inspiration behind the motocross group and future clothing company Metal Militia, led by Brian Deegan, who is an avid Metallica fan. This is another song that was co-written by Dave Mustaine, and according to him had no input from Lars at all, as him and James sat down to record their song together. But I guess that's another story. Originally, the album wasn't going to be called Kill 'Em All. Its working title was Metal Up Your Ass, and featured this album cover that you can see on my shirt. The purpose was a bit of gatekeeping, and to warn off any posers that this wasn't a typical heavy metal album, and anyone who would second guess their intentions should leave this record alone. Their manager at the time, Johnny Zazula, had to convince the band that such a record would never be promoted in any store. While it seems laughable now that a hand holding a knife sticking out of a toilet would never sell, especially given future album covers and in the day and age of WAP, it wasn't a bad point to concede to, given that at the time most albums album's artworks were nothing like this, and featured mostly bands' photographs or mythological deities, with Dio's Holy Diver and Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast. In fact, looking at the Bloodied Hammer cover in hindsight, it's not only a better piece of artwork, looking at you early Pantera albums, but it's a more ominous effort for its lack of what is shown. The title of the record is at the bottom in a simple fashion, and the band's now legendary logo made its debut atop, but the silhouette of a hand reaching out for a bloodied hammer is something else. Has it been used? And if so, how? Is the person exhausted or expired from their actions? And judging by the open hand, of course. Are they finished or going for more? What we don't see leaves us to make up a story in our mind, and makes it significantly a better album cover than the original one. Speaking of last minute changes, with Kirk Hammett's addition to the band, he only had 1 week to learn all of their material.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Cocked your hand to the side and said I'm angry.
To top it off, apparently the studio they were recording at was haunted, and the recording engineers would lock the band out during mixing stages. The album's name, Kill 'Em All, came from Cliff, who was angry at the changes required for the record's title and stated, "Fuck those record outlet people, we should kill 'em all." This line struck a chord with Johnny, and he convinced the band that they should change the name of the record to this. As mentioned before, the album saw 2 singles released, with the first one being Whiplash on the 8th of August in 1983, which has been cited to be Kurt Cobain's favourite song by the band, and Jump in the Fire, which was released on the 20th of January 1984, 6 months before Ride the Lightning came out. If you take a moment to listen to the demos of Metallica's works, then we can see that this body of works is largely there, but the final cut would see lyrical changes in songs due to Dave's dismissal, most prominently on Jump in the Fire, which dealt with sex originally instead of demons and welcoming to hell as it is now. Some of the songs are performed faster, as is often the case when doing live shows. See Dave Lombardo's drum tech sessions on Rain in Blood as an example.
You know what? This is too slow. No, I'm serious. We play it live. It's a lot faster, so let's do it real quick.
The main standout, of course, is in the production quality, but this is to be expected from any demo recorded in a garage from a tape deck compared to the studio. It's still a trip to hear these songs in their infancy, in particular for the live recordings from shows. With hindsight in mind, we know Metallica's legacy has been set in concrete for years, and this album is no different to their other groundbreaking records. In fact, Kill 'Em All is cited as being one of the first thrash metal albums that saw a surge in the style alongside Slayer's Show No Mercy and Anthrax's Fistful of Metal. They were really there for the genesis of the genre that spawned a new style of metal that became a game changer. They took their roots from the 70s rock acts like Sabbath, and including several great riffs with aggressively fast tempos, while firmly rooting it to their influences in the new wave of British heavy metal. This record would show the world that it was America's turn to take the wheel and drive the scene in a new direction, and you know that they did so. This record saw a rise in the Bay Area thrash metal scene and other bands in this area, such as with Exodus and Testament, who were known back then as Legacy, all of which would get record signings shortly after, and mostly through Megaforce Records, which was founded by John Zazula and his wife Marsha. In fact, the success of this record catapulted Megaforce's standing as an independent record label, and with many other artists joining their roster, producing many songs and records that would eventually make their way into top 200 Billboard charts. The label would eventually find their material distributed through Atlantic Records. Marsha and John Zazula would both pass away in 2021 and 2022 respectively, but their contribution to the metal scene is a pivotal one. Overall, I will be giving this album a score of 11 million chilies on the spicy scale, with my favourite tracks being Hit the Lights, Jump in the Fire, Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, Whiplash, Phantom Lord, and Seek and Destroy. Kill 'Em All saw the rise of what would become known as the Big Four. That is Metallica, Megadeth, Anthrax and Slayer, the big four thrash metal bands of the 80s. This record is steeped in a rich history that sees the origins of Metallica cross over with many different bands of the scene. I can only imagine what it would have been like being in high school listening to this album for the first time when it came out in 1983. In fact, if you were one of the lucky people to be in that age group, you are most likely one of my subscribers to this channel. So this seems like a perfect time to shamelessly plug myself. So like and subscribe if you can. I can certainly recall the first time I heard this album when I was in high school myself, and it was nearly 20 years old by this stage. It was like nothing I had ever heard before, and seemed perfect for my young adolescent mind. a record filled with angst and aggression that could be played at full volume amongst my friends who were all big Metallica fans at the time. Compare this record to the first Metallica album I ever heard, which was the Black Album, and it is vastly different. How far a band can evolve in the space of 10 years. I'm not saying it like it was one of those gatekeeper moments who thinks that old school Metallica is the only Metallica that I should listen to. In fact, the Black Album to me is one of my favourite records of all time. But it is interesting to see a band that 10 years prior was playing nothing but this simple, fast, aggressive metal. I have long pondered the thought of Metallica's evolution in regards to their first 5 albums, and you can see it simply when you are reflecting all of this. The Black Album was their commercial success and breakthrough into the mainstream media, and Justice for All was a technical masterpiece and a foray into the progressive metal scene that was relatively unheard of for the time, but its flaws lay in its production. If you are unaware, you should listen to the re-uploaded version called And Justice for Jason, which basically includes all the bass lines that can't be heard in the original. Master of Puppets, it goes without saying, is the poster child of 80s metal music. This record really needs no introduction, and if you are looking to get into Metallica, this is probably the first album I would point to. Ride the Lightning is that perfect crossover between thrash and melody, and is arguably Metallica's best record to date. Kill 'Em All, that's the beginning of the Metallica story, a showcase of what the band would eventually become. In truth, that was probably the 3rd chapter of their book, all things considered. So what about Dave Mustaine's influence regarding this album? Are they significant enough to be mentioned? Well, he has 4 songwriting credits on an album with 10 tracks, and amongst those tracks, they are some of the best material. In fact, his influences would also be heard all the way into their next album, Ride the Lightning, where he has 2 more contributions, with Ride the Lightning and Call of the Cthulhu, which in the Megadeth universe is known as Hangar 18, and is almost better than the mammoth of that song. So I think it's safe to say that Dave's inclusion in the band, albeit limited, was massively influential. In fact, I would go on a limb and say that if Dave hadn't been in the early lineup, Metallica may not have had their success until much later. He's an extremely talented musician and guitarist, and this can be heard in his band Megadeth. Another question some Metallica fans often ask themselves is, what if Metallica had continued with Dave Mustaine and Cliff Burton? Well, fans often speculate that they would write some of their best material that the world has ever seen in regards to thrash metal. However, I would seem to think that Dave's hot-headedness and Cliff's never-back-down attitude would create these 2 massive egos that just collided, and the band would have only existed for a very short period before imploding. And after all, what kind of world would you want to live in if you couldn't listen to Megadeth? While there has been a lot of animosity between the 2 bands for a long time, it seems that the hatchet has almost been buried when the Big Four did reunite on a one-off concert back in 2010, performing the thrash metal staple Diamond Head's song Am I Evil? Dave still likes to whinge about Metallica from time to time, but I kind of get the feeling it's because, well, everyone who interviews him just constantly brings it up, and he is of course going to be sour about this. Who can really blame him? The guy had a very good thing and unfortunately squandered it. From time to time, I still like to pull out Kill 'Em All and give it a red hot spin, and while it's certainly not my favourite Metallica record, it's certainly one that I look back on fondly. And with the rise of today's ability to stream whatever music you feel like at the current mood you are feeling, it's very different to really getting stuck into a record. I'm going to tap into my inner boomer mentality for a moment here and say, back in my day, we used to buy CDs, which meant devoting yourself to one album at a time rather than jumping all over the place like a kid on some sugar rush in a trampoline store.
Trampoline! Trampoline!
You said what now?
I can't fault today's style of music. After all, it has allowed me to access many different musicians that I would have otherwise unheard of, but it is a little bit different. And the bonus is I can listen to whatever I want, whenever I want. And it's easier than burning a CD with a compilation of your favourite tracks on it and changing discs within a Walkman, especially when the batteries ran out on that thing. No, this record really is one that I look back on fondly, because, well, I'm a Metallica fan, and I will always defend their early stuff. To me, the album still holds a lot of weight in today's metal world. The raspy recording styles still ring true to that era of music, and while James' vocals were still in the higher octaves and not as gruffy as what Papa Hetfield would become later in his career, the vocals are still quite impressive. I mean, as a Metallica fan, how can you not love Seek and Destroy? And how can you not in turn love this album? Thank you for checking out this episode of Retro Reviews. Make sure you do the socials, like this video, subscribe if you can, and as always people, you have a great day. Stay spicy.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Live Listener Race. And if you have enjoyed this episode, make sure you share it with all your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our Chili Con Carnage crew so you can get notified for all the future videos that we put out, as we put out videos every Friday. Also, we are on Discord, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter over at Live Listener Race, so make sure to tune in over there. And don't forget to like this video so that our manager can stay very happy.